Hi, third grade readers. Welcome back to our reading workshop lesson. Hope you're doing great. Today we are on our 15th, can you believe it? Reading workshop lesson that's centered around our nonfiction reading. Boys and girls, yesterday, if you remember, we created our charts with our boxes or box and bullets, and we created our subcategories of all the different things that we were interested in learning. Today, we're going to dive a little deeper now. We're going to now select one of those areas, and I'm going to teach you a few things that we're going to do to gather the new facts on one of our subtopics. So today you will need a piece of paper, or if you do have your reading notebook that you've been keeping notes in, we're going to need that because we're going to be taking some great notes today. So, we are going to, let me first show you this. We are going to do the following. We're going to summarize the important information as we're reading or as we're studying our subtopic of interest. So while we do that, we're going to look for the main idea. We're going to look for key details. We're going to look for in the structure of how the text is written. And then we're also going to, it says here, we're going to have general categories instead of listing all the basic details that are given. Okay. So, let's get started. So if you remember, our class studying is going to be on frogs. Yours at home might be something different, but together we're going to be studying frogs. And a subtopic that we're going to focus on today is food. Frogs and the food that they eat. And we're going to be finding this information and digging deeper in all three of our texts. So before I get started, I want to think of what are a couple questions, 2 to 3 questions that I have in regards to that subtopic of food. And one question that I have when it comes to the frogs' food is, what do they eat? So on a piece of paper, I'm writing down, what do they eat? And there is another question that I have that I'm hoping I can learn more about so that when I become that expert, and it's how do they get the food? Okay, so what you're going to do is you will also write your main idea at the top, your subtopic, which mine is food. And I have my 2 questions. The first one is, what do they eat? You can notice I left a big area because this is where I'm going to be taking my notes while I read. And my second main question that I'm going to want to find research on is, how do they get the food? Okay, so again, you might have a few more questions for your topic, but I'm going to start with these 2. All right, so now I'm going to go into one of our books, which is on frogs, and I'm going to go to the section that's on food. So of course, I use my table of contents. I find what section is going to teach me about the food they eat, and that's page 12. So when I'm on these pages, now I'm going to read this information and see if I get any info to fill in to the questions that I'm wondering about. What do they eat and how do they get their food? And I'll be taking notes while I read because right now I'm exploring. I'm trying to learn more information that I don't already know. So here we go. Frog food. What is a frog's favorite food? Usually it's insects. Frogs eat dragonflies and crickets and other bugs. Okay. So if you remember, one of my first questions is, what do they eat? Well, we just read on this page that they usually eat insects, dragonflies, and crickets. So now on my paper here, I'm going to jot down that note. I'm going to write insects. I'm going to put dragonflies and crickets. Okay, let's continue to see if we learn some more information on this page. Some frogs eat bigger animals like worms and mice. Okay, well, that is something that they eat. Those are bigger animals. So now I'm going to take a note of that. I'm going to do another bullet, bigger animals. I'm going to list some of the bigger animals that we just read about, worms and mice. So as you can see here, let me block that light a little bit. I'm listing those things that I just learned about what do they eat. All right, and I'm looking at my pictures because I'm seeing that sometimes we can see other things in the pictures that give us more information than what we read. And then those are things that I could write down. All right, I'm now going to move into my second book. This one is titled Frogs and Toads. And I'm going to go to the table of contents and see where can I find about the food that they eat. Yep, and it's right there. And it says yummy frog food, which is page 12. All right. And now we're going to see if I can get more facts to write down for what do they eat and how do they get the food. Okay, let's see if we can add more. So, yummy frog food. Frogs and toads eat worms, snails, and insects such as mosquitoes and dragonflies. So let's stop there for a minute. We already learned in our last book that from this one that frogs eat dragonflies and crickets. Did we hear anything new about what frogs eat in the insect category? They also said snails and mosquitoes. So I need to add that now to my list. Well, where we put insects, I'm going to add in here mosquitoes and snails. Now, did you notice that they also said dragonflies? And we already had that fun fact from this book. So sometimes the books that you're reading will have some of the same facts and some will have new things. So you need to add those on your chart. All right, so let's continue. Many frogs and toads have long, sticky tongues for catching food. The tongue is attached at the front of the mouth. It stays rolled up until it's needed. When an insect buzzes by, the tongue quickly shoots out, catches the insect, and pulls it back into the mouth. Frogs and toads have great aim. Okay, well, what was our other question that we were wondering? It was, how do they get their food? Does this explain to us how frogs capture and get their food? Most definitely it does. So now I can take some facts and write them down on my second question, that is, how do they get their food? And the first thing we read was they have a long, sticky tongue. Okay, so I'm going to write that fact down. And then we read that the tongue is attached to the front of the mouth. That's a good, important fact. I'm going to write that down. I'm copying it right from my book. Tongue attached at the front of the mouth. Okay? And then they proceeded to tell us exactly the steps, the first, the second, and the third step that the frog has to take. And it was the tongue stays rolled up. So I'm going to write that, stays rolled up. The next thing we read was it quickly shoots out. So I'm going to write that, quickly shoots out. The next thing was catches the food. So let's write that down, catches the food. And then the final thing was pulls it back in its mouth. And I'm going to write that. So now take a look at my chart. So now I have all these ways listed that we just read about on how a frog catches their food. All right, now I'm going to go into my third book. And this one is titled The Life Cycle of Frogs. And I'm going to go to the table of contents and find what page frog food is on. And it shows on page 22. So now, as a reader, I would read through this page and see, are there any additional facts that I don't already have written down for what a frog eats and how they get their food, okay? And then you would add to this chart. Now, when I read, I might see that they yet again tell me that they eat dragonflies and crickets and mosquitoes, and I already have those things listed. So I don't need to rewrite those things, but you might come to something that is a little different than you already have, and then you can include that. And one thing that I see and have read on this page that's different, look what this frog's eating, this big frog. That big frog is eating another frog. So we don't have that listed on our chart yet. So I'm going to add that on what they eat. And I'm going to put larger frogs eat smaller frogs. So that's something new from this book. And I also have a fun fact that I'm reading here at the bottom. And it tells me about how they obtain water in their body. And that is not one of my questions that I posed. I didn't ask, how do they drink water? It still is related to their food, right? So I added a fun fact at the bottom that could be a fact that I would share with others. And it says, they don't drink water, they absorb water through their skin. So readers, here's what your job will be today. You're going to look at your mini little table of contents that you wrote up yesterday. You're going to find a subtopic. That's these bullet points. Find a subtopic that you want to dig deeper on. Today I chose food. Then, using your materials that you have for reading from, hopefully at least 3 different texts, you're going to read about that certain area. And we chose food for ours. Then I want you to take your notebook or a piece of paper, and I want you to put the topic at the top. So mine was frog food. Then I want you to take a minute and think of what are some questions you have about that subtopic that you want to learn more about. I wanted to learn about what do they eat and how do they get the food. So you already have your mindset of what you're going to be seeking. Then I want you to start in one book, see if you can answer those questions, and then start logging those ideas and facts on your paper. Then you'll go to your second book, read that section, and see what information you can add. Okay, this is really going to help you with gathering that new information and staying on task and on topic and getting you even more prepared to presenting this information and being that expert. All right, so have fun reading. I hope you're enjoying the topic that you've chosen and try to fit in 20 to 30 minutes today to do some of your independent reading. I'm so proud of you guys. Keep up the great work and see you again tomorrow.